You like things just so. So do we. The Bank of Clark is the bank for that. We all have an inner perfectionist who deserves things done their way. Maybe you like to bank in person. Maybe you prefer to bank online. We get it. From banking to lending to wealth management, we're all about getting things done just the way you like them. We're the bank for that. Find out what banking designed for you is all about. Visit your local Bank of Clark branch today or go to bankofclark.bank. We're the bank for that. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 543 for July 13th, 2023. And I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Thanks for joining us this week, everybody. Oh boy, this one's going to be a doozy.
Oh, man. Well, thank goodness there's no podcasting union that we're part of. I'll just say that.
Yeah. This is going to be an interesting show, and it's not too dissimilar from last week in the sense that when we got into Mission Impossible, we opened that episode by talking about how it was a little bit of a pivot. Things went a little unexpectedly. We had to adapt. We're sort of doing that this week as well.
Yeah.
In the sense that we are recording this early because I'm going on vacation. So when this episode goes out and live, I will be in the mountains of Tennessee. Hello, everybody. I'm in Tennessee right now.
I did not even know you were going to be in Tennessee. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so it's going to be very exciting. So we're recording this a little early.
Right.
As I noted, July 13th turned out to be a very historic day for Hollywood.
It's interesting. We actually sort of had like a looser version of this topic, sort of top of mind to talk about, and then all of a sudden new breakthroughs came out that just kept fueling the fire that we needed to talk about. It's as if Hollywood was listening to Brendan and JD of the InSession Film Podcast thinking, yeah, you guys want more to talk about? Here you go. Here you go.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because we brought up the current state of cinema as a topic, 3 weeks ago now? Something to that effect. And at that time, it was inspired by these incessant box office disappointments. It seemed as if the studios were losing a lot of money. People aren't going to the theaters as much anymore. And so we tried to dig into the root of what might be driving that. And then, the next week there was a little bit of an update. We had to talk about that a little bit further.
Right.
And then there comes the SAG strike.
Yes.
And what we've been hearing from the studios and their perspectives and the disparity between them. So, we were going into this episode already with that in mind because that's been looming for a little while now. We did not anticipate that today, as we are recording this, the floodgates would open. And did the floodgates open?
Yes. Many news outlets breaking, not just the news itself of the SAG strike, which I believe starts at midnight tonight as we are recording this, is the official start time, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But also some of the verbal rumblings that apparently have been that have been happening behind the scenes. Apparently a few flies on the wall have been letting loose some of the conversations that have been happening that some studios were willing to financially offer that kind of led to this breaking point for these actors.
Yeah.
We'll certainly talk about that as well. I saw one tweet. I forget who it was, so please forgive me so I can, I want to give credit where credit is due, but I can't quite do that yet. But someone said that I don't want to see anyone complaining about one-dimensional villains in superhero movies anymore.
Seriously. Or these movies that are about the wealthy eating the rich, which was a prominent theme last year, and as derivative as they may come off, or it's a little misguided or one note. Yeah, I don't want to hear it about those movies either, because what we're seeing right now is exactly, what the menu had tried to warn us about, for example.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, it's wild how the Hollywood studio system is embracing brazenly, publicly, the mustache twirly ethos.
It sometimes makes me think, is it being embellished? I don't know if it is. I'm not saying it is or isn't. I kind of think that it isn't, to be perfectly honest. I think there is a lot of truth in what we're hearing, but I mean, it almost sounds fake. Like it's that extreme is basically what I'm trying to say. Like it does sound genuinely mustache twirly, as you're putting it there.
I mean, it really does. Like if this was a movie playing out instead of, real life, if this was a movie playing out, what we are seeing from the Hollywood studios absolutely comes off as that derivative trope of, of course, he's the greedy businessman that doesn't care about these poor actors and writers and artists who are starving, and he's out to just make his money. And
there is just going to be some. I mean, if the strike doesn't affect it, but at some point down the line, maybe a few years or so, if things do get resolved by then, there's going to be some movie made in the vein of like an Adam McKay kind of thing that is simply just called Iger. And just like basically uses that as its inspirational point to tell this very story.
And I do love that many outlets today were pointing out that Iger specifically makes $27 million a year.
Yeah.
And yet he's not willing to pay residuals above $300. Like, God forbid. They just laid off 7,000 people at Disney for God knows whatever reason, and he makes $27 million. Like, what reality is he living in?
I mean, we're in a reality where we're going to be replacing background actors with AI now. So
that's a big part of it. That's
a huge part of it.
Like that was striking to me. Now, as we get into it, and I do want to talk about that, but I actually want to start the conversation here because there was an article that came out with Papa Spielberg, our beloved Goat Spielberg, right?
Yeah. What was that, 10 years ago?
Well, now you're you got to let me get to this, man. You're letting the cat out of the bag.
Well, I mean, come on. Everyone knows about this.
We got to build this up. Come on. We're doing a show.
Everyone's angry. We're not building anything here. There's the suspense has already been left. This is sad.
It is. I was trying to employ a little showmanship, and Brennan's like, we're not having that.
There's no showmanship to be had here. Let's not give any credit to this.
Fair enough. But yes, Steven Spielberg predicts implosion of the film industry. That was a headline for June 12th, 2013. 10 years in a month, almost to the day.
Yeah.
And not only is that an interesting headline, I actually want to read this first paragraph here in this article. Steven Spielberg on Wednesday predicted an implosion in the film industry is inevitable, whereby a half a dozen or so $250 million movies flop at the box office and alter the industry forever. What comes next, or even before then, will be price variances at movie theaters where, quote, you're going to have to pay $25 for the next Iron Man. You're probably only going to have to pay $7 to see Lincoln, end quote. He also said Lincoln came, quote, this close to being an HBO movie instead of a theatrical release.
Wow.
That is the first paragraph of this article that came out in 2013, in the summer of 2013, 10 years ago. Is that not verbatim what just happened?
Like, more or less.
When we're talking about these flops. And that was what started this conversation with us a few weeks ago. Where, again, let me read it again. The industry, there's an implosion in the film industry is inevitable, whereby a half a dozen or so $250 million movies flop at the box office and alter the industry forever.
Yeah.
What did we just talk about with The Flash and Transformers and Indiana? Like, how much did those movies cost? At least that or more.
Spielberg, Lucas, where is your time machine? I want to try and take this for a test ride myself.
Yeah, seriously. So, like, that's exactly what just happened. And I find it also fascinating because in 2013, yes, Netflix did exist, but the streaming wars had not begun yet.
No.
The only other option at that time was HBO. And Spielberg states specifically that Lincoln was almost an HBO movie. So even at that time, the seeds of what we're getting now was very much there, and he could foresee where this was going to go.
And how many times have we seen movies like a Lincoln, in a broad sense, a big historical epic of sorts that would nowadays be a Max original or something
look
like
at
that.
Scorsese, right? Like something like The Irishman. Like Netflix had to fund that. So to Spielberg's point, Lincoln, if it came out today, would have to be an Irishman. It would be a Netflix or an Apple funding that, not the theater system.
No.
So it was very prescient the way that first paragraph is like. I read that today and it blew my mind.
I think the word that he used that I think is so appropriate is implosion, right?
Yes.
Because it is literally happening within the actual system, and we're noticing that now, and we're seeing the residual effects of that, and it's damaging and it's devastating, and we've talked about that for not even just weeks. We've been talking about this for years, sometimes offline. A few times it would make its way into our conversations, and how we notice we notice these things, whether it be directly or indirectly, affecting the quality of films, and audiences are starting to take notice, and that then bleeds into financial troubles. So we have been sort of seeing this firsthand. We're just now noticing, or verbally noticing, the root problem even more that we always knew was there, and it makes it even more devastating to know how right Spielberg was for the past decade even. That's just insane.
Yeah, absolutely, because we knew that the industry was heading in this direction. You're right. We've talked about this several times before on the show, but COVID certainly progressed all of this by about 10 years or so.
It exacerbated it pretty quickly.
Absolutely. And then the other big thing, and you noted this a few minutes ago as well, the inclusion of AI now.
Yeah.
Which I also find hilarious because Hollywood itself has warned us about AI and its destruction for years. For decades, Hollywood has been delving into this topic itself.
Oh, come on. Why can't James Cameron just be the head of Hollywood? Because he knew about this all along.
He did. And here we are.
And he would also be someone that would use AI right if it came to it. You know, he would find a way to integrate it within the Hollywood, or the classic Hollywood structure that we still love, right? He would find a way, But yeah, he's someone that's been warning us about this for so long, and now we're seeing it firsthand, which has become even a bigger problem. It's no coincidence that the two unions that are striking right now are the ones that are arguably most affected by the use of AI in the Hollywood system.
Oh, for sure. No, that is no coincidence. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And in the world of marketing, which is where I spend a lot of my daytime, AI is a prominent tool. You see it everywhere.
Yeah.
And it is a useful tool in the right hands when utilized properly. However, when it comes to something like journalism, we've seen a lot of outlets just straight up destroy their writer staff and are almost entirely reliant on AI, which is devastating. And then now with the Writers Guild, Hollywood is obviously wanting to do the same thing. They want AI to write scripts and human beings to simply touch it up. And I don't know how that will work. I don't see that being something that will be sustainable.
I don't either. Well, because what you're doing with those specific situations is that you're taking away a voice, right?
Yeah.
A unique voice. And this is not just affecting movies and television within a Hollywood system like that. It could even affect, really large-scale content creators, YouTube creators that actually function like a business, right? If they were to actually employ AI or ChatGPT into their into their workload, it completely affects those that are actually working behind the scenes there as well. I mean, you're right. There is definitely a positive use that could come from that in the right hands and in the right way. It could be, useful, and from a time standpoint, for sure. Like I think I mentioned this once before. When my band had a gig, it was a very last minute gig. We used ChatGPT to make our set list. But that doesn't require a voice necessarily.
No,
it's more of a practical use as opposed to an emotional use, and that's where it becomes very problematic.
Absolutely, and that's where, again, in the world of marketing, it can be very useful because you're using it for practical reasons, sometimes mathematical or analytical reasons. And in that context, it's perfectly fine. And to me, it's been very helpful. But yes, when it comes to a vision, when it comes to a voice, artificial intelligence cannot replicate the human experience.
And when it does, we're in trouble.
Yes. When it does, that's where Papa Spielberg comes back into the fold here a little bit. But it cannot replicate the human experience. It's the same thing visually speaking, and this circles back to today's events because we found out that the studios proposed AI as being something where they scanned actor's likeness for 1 day's worth of pay and then using that likeness in any form without any pay or consent moving forward, which is nightmarish.
Do you know what that sounds like? That sounds like Hollywood scanning your image and saying, "We own the way you look now."
Yeah.
It's like that is exactly what it is.
And that's not how it works.
Yeah.
You can certainly ask colleges about this because college sports is in an uproar over the last few years because athletes have taken power into their own hands to fight this exact same thing. Well, maybe not exactly the same thing because it's not AI rooted, but the idea of likeness is their own. And they've taken control of that. And now college athletics is a very different animal than it was just 3 or 4 years ago. Right. And now the Screen Actors Guild is having to fight this same battle, but maybe even on a steeper uphill because the inclusion of AI certainly adds a more prominent or a more challenging hurdle that they have to cross here.
And the thing that upsets me the most with this specific example that we're talking about is that specific role that they're saying that they're going to take a likeness of, which are the quote-unquote background actors. You have actors out there that are part of SAG, part of this union, who might be looking to escalate up the ladder, right? They need this work, right? So if they realize they're going to be scanned and used for other properties, but they don't have to work for those, and they're only getting paid for that one scan of likeness that they're taking, that completely limits how much that they can actually make a living off of.
But that's just the beginning.
Exactly.
What it will evolve into is, well, Harrison Ford doesn't have to really be in this scene. He's just standing there. It's these other two characters talking, so we'll just CGI his likeness into this frame.
Yeah.
You know, that like it might start with background actors, but it will quickly evolve to prominent actors who don't have to act in a certain frame or in a certain scene, and their likeness becomes included into the frame because of this. And I can't foresee that being something that these actors want. And I, as a consumer of art, certainly don't want it. And I want to circle it back to that human experience because it's not just writing, obviously, and perhaps even more prominently with visuals. When we see these AI videos that come out, we talked about this a few weeks ago with Wes Anderson, but certainly there are many other examples. It is like the uncanny valley is extraordinary in these videos. These AI tools, these systems cannot replicate human beings in a real sense. Yeah. And it is so easy to tell. That's why the Wes Anderson AI videos are horrible. Or recently we saw someone go viral for doing the same thing with Indiana Jones. Like, it just looks horrible. It looks terrible because it is that uncanny valley. And I think the same thing can be applied to writing as well. You can tell when it is not a human being writing about the human experience.
Ghosted.
Yeah, exactly. And so you need human writers to write that and for us to feel emotion. I just think it'll be very easy to tell. And to your point, Brendan, the results won't be great.
They won't be great. No, because you're right. You could tell by the banter, the dialogue, the verbiage. There is a voice on the page. I mean, you read a script by Paul Thomas Anderson and then you read a script by Wes Anderson. They're not going to even look the same on the page, right?
No,
it's
very
a
different.
Completely different tonality. And that is something that AI cannot replicate. And thank God it can't replicate that, because if there's anything that's going to destroy this trajectory, it's the realization that that is still the case. And hopefully that is the realization we come to. But from an actor's standpoint, we sadly have been kind of seeing this already for some time, just in a different way, and that's, like the resurrection of dead actors in new movies.
Yes,
like, let's say Peter Cushing, for instance, in Rogue One. It's certainly a different situation, but also not really, right? Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it is kind of the precursor for what we're talking about here, and how that could then tailor to well-known characters or even well-known actors that can't be part of the film, even if they're no longer, or I should say, even if they're not, for lack of a better term, dead. If they're still alive and don't want to do that property, they can get scanned digitally into a movie and say they're in it. And it's a wild theory that exists around that.
Absolutely. And when Rogue One came out, there was a lot of controversy around it. Disney got into some hot water, and I don't think it's something Lucasfilm did not want to replicate later on. And studios, I don't think, want to touch it in that regard. But maybe if they can get away with this AI thing, maybe that will be less controversial for them. Maybe they'll do it anyway. I don't really know.
Because by that point, it's going to be part of the writing. It's going to be part of their contract, essentially. And that's a scary thought.
Well, and here's the other thing, too, that I'm really curious about is audience and how they respond, right? Because part of why, that film was controversial is that there were a lot of people that were like, this is a bad idea. You probably shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
And so when these things come up later on, or when there's discussion of, who's going to replace General Leia in Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, or Last Jedi. I'm confused on my time.
Rise of Skywalker. Yeah, she was still alive after Last Jedi had been filmed. Okay. I think she passed away just as that movie was being released.
Yeah. Either way, my point being is, like, when these opportunities arise, and when that one certainly arose, Lucasfilm was like, well, we're not doing the computer generated thing.
Yeah.
And then it became a talking point of, is she going to be recast or not? And, and I bring that up to say, if this AI thing becomes something that the studios are allowed to use, and hopefully we don't get to that point, but if they do win this battle, what if audiences reject it? What if they don't like it? What if they don't want that? What if they want human beings in these roles?
That's a great question. And I mean, this is why marketing in a general sense is so important. Marketing strategy, right? Because we need to know what the voice of customer is. I mean, we would reject it, right? As critics, as lovers of film, as advocates for the preservation of film, of course, we're all going to reject it. But the question is, are we just a loud minority in all of this?
Maybe. I don't know.
And I'm not saying we are or we aren't. I honestly don't know. I think a proper poll would need to be put in place to see what that is, because what if we're getting to a point where general audiences are so that they become so desensitized by the way that modern Hollywood has been operating that they don't feel very fazed by this thing. And that's the scary part for me, at least, because if they're unfazed by it, then Hollywood feels no responsibility not to do it, and it's a wild thing.
And I don't know if they do feel any responsibility anyway, because as they've demonstrated these last few weeks, and especially today, they don't care. No soul. These guys. I mean, unbelievable. What was the quote? The end game is to allow them to drag on until union members start losing their apartments and losing their homes.
Again, like
what? They said that out loud.
Is that true? I mean, come on. Like, that is just that's a movie script waiting to happen, right?
Yeah.
I mean, ridiculous if that was truly said.
Exactly. Like, to your point earlier, that is so obviously mustache twirling. Like that.
If this were a movie, we'd be criticizing the villain for being one-dimensional.
Exactly. I mean, that is so cold-hearted. And what one insider called it a cruel but necessary evil. How is any of this necessary? Like, that's what I don't really understand here.
It just completely spits in the face of the art itself. And it's a shame that, the writers and the actors are being the ones that are receiving the short end of the stick when we see these movies, and of course we talk about the direction and all these other attributes that certainly play into what makes a great movie, but I mean, the in many ways, the tone and the face of all of these properties come from those who are now on strike, and it's so unfortunate that they're not given the credit for what makes a product that this studio is selling so great. And that's it. That's the thing that really rubs me the wrong way is basically someone reaping the benefits of someone else's work is really what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. And I would really like to have a discussion or hear at least the studio's perspective in detailed fashion why streaming has become such a handcuffed thing for them. And I say that because I know I was on social media a lot this afternoon following all of this unfold.
Yeah.
And someone was tweeting out Bob Iger's comments and perspective on streaming and why it's a problem. And hey, if you look at it from this perspective, it's understandable. Which championing Bob Iger in all of this is a choice.
Well,
it
makes it a pretty ironic choice, because if you just take those comments from Bob Iger in a vacuum, then yeah, if you look at it broadly, okay, maybe he's making a point that there are problems with streaming platforms that need to be fixed, but it just makes his overall comments on this whole situation so borderline hypocritical, right?
Well, and here's the reason I bring up specificity is to say this, because when this user on Twitter was, throwing out these screenshots and here's what Bob Iger had to say, Bob Iger didn't say anything. He said a lot of words to say nothing. All he said is that the system is quote unquote broken. What does that mean? Because he wasn't specific on why it's broken, on why they can't pay residuals comparatively to the cable, structure that was there previously. That has not been talked about out loud, at least that I have seen. Maybe this is out in the open and I am just ignorant of it. And I'd be open to someone showing me the evidence of why this is such a huge deal. But again, I go back to the Bob Igers of the world, the David Zaslavs of the world, make $27 million a year. And these guys are spearheading projects that cost $300 million that are bad investments, and they're throwing them to theaters and losing tons of money in the process. These guys are bad, capital B, objectively bad at their jobs, and yet they get paid $22 million a year, yet these artists they can't be paid their residuals. So where is the system broken, Iger? Where? Because what I see is broken is that you're cutting jobs, 7,000 of them at the very least. You're making 300 times more than most of these do in a year. You're doing that a day.
Yeah.
That to me is where this is broken. It's not streaming that's broken. So I would love to hear Iger break down specifically. Give us the nuances. why is this broken? Why can't you pay these residuals? Because the comments he made they were vague. You can't read any, like, there's no perspective to be had because he's talking in generalities. Oh, it's broken. Well, why? Why is it broken?
He's not wrong that it's broken, but let's talk about why it's broken. You're absolutely right. And it's such a shame too. I mean, you could definitely clearly sense such apathy in these words that are being said, especially when you've got the head of Disney making comments like, "Oh, the system's broken." Yet they laid off so many jobs in many of these acquisitions over the years, such as 20th Century Fox, and they're using that logo as the butt of a joke for Deadpool 3.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's, I mean, like, that just further proves the ignorance and the hypocrisy all at hand here, right? It's absolutely nauseating.
Or how about, you want to talk about a broken system here, Bob? Although this isn't Bob, I think this is Zasloff. But I saw earlier today that Steven Soderbergh has a new series out on HBO Max, or Max, whatever it's called now. How many
I'm
of
still
you
going to call it HBO Max
watching knew that? Because I'm raising my hand. I didn't, and I love Soderbergh. Like, there was zilch, nada, no marketing for that whatsoever. And if you go to Max, if you go to the homepage, I virtually guarantee it's not on the homepage.
Oh no, it's going to be something DC related or something like that, right?
It's going to be buried,
or it'll be plastered with the new season of whatever that new Sex in the City show is, and just like that, is that the name of it or something?
Something like that.
Yeah, it's going to be something like that that's plastered all over the homepage, but nothing by the legendary Steven Soderbergh at this point.
Yeah, I mean, let's start there. Let's talk about how the system is broken, David.
Let's talk about diversifying content, right? Let's talk about diversifying content for the audiences and not just target a certain audience that tends to watch the same things over and over again.
And let's create art, not content. Let's also start there, because I think that is another big problem. I mean, streaming has its issues. We brought this up a few weeks ago when we were talking about the box office and Pixar and some of the choices they've made, which, by the way, we do owe Elemental an apology, because that movie has gone on to make a lot of money for the last 3 weeks.
I did mention that there was at least something kind of promising about the consistency of its monetary gain when we talked about that maybe this is not going to be a bad thing, and it's actually doing pretty well now.
It's kind of crazy. Like, looking at it here, worldwide, it has made $259 million, which is a lot better than what it was a few weeks ago. So, and I think I read that, was it something like that? It's the best Pixar movie, I guess, since COVID had happened. Which, kind of makes sense, because we're 3 years removed, or 3 years since the beginning of it, I should say.
And I use that to say, okay, here's a great example of releasing original Pixar movies back in theaters now. Screw this whole Disney Plus exclusive thing. And Luca's still a big hit. We talked about this. Let's throw that back in theaters for its 5-year anniversary. We're getting close to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to see that, but I don't know if it's, people needing to warm up to it, or maybe it came out at the wrong time. There was just other movies that people wanted to see first. Maybe that's what it was. So, I mean, also, let's not lose sight of the fact that $260 million is much better than what it was previously, but it's still a far cry from Pixar pre-COVID.
It's not great, but I mean, we're not going to get $800 million Pixar movies right off the bat after the failures that they've had post-COVID, right? It's just it's not going to make that jump unless you're, I don't know, unless you're Toy Story 5 and it's reviewed to be the greatest animated movie of all time. It's
but still, I don't love Pixar's strategy for the reasons we talked about a few weeks ago, but I am happy to see that Elemental is not the bomb that we thought it was. It actually has done much better, and actually, holds a little bit of stature given, recent animated movies. So that was exciting to see. However, circling it back to what we're talking about here.
We're trying to find some positivity in all of this. It's hard now.
But that is to say, streaming has its issues. I don't necessarily disagree that it is broken, but I think critics, hopefully audience as well, we are certainly looking at the definition of broken in a very, very, very different light than Iger, where Iger is simply looking at it in terms of math and numbers, and he doesn't want to pay the artist because of whatever math he's looking at, which they won't tell us. They won't tell us why he thinks it's broken, and it's not for the reasons you and I are talking about.
No. And that's the problem with business nowadays, is that you can mathematically decipher what your business is doing positively or negatively, right? Like there's a way you could do that across the board, but not every business is the same. You know, other businesses need to operate with different customers and different strategies in mind. And that's where I think this is even more problematic, because, yes, you can look at it mathematically, and Bob Iger might be the best finance advisor that you could probably work with. He probably knows numbers like the back of his hand. He could probably balance both our checkbooks in like 5 seconds if he wanted to. But is that the right mindset for a movie business? And that's where the question, I think, is even, is not being really talked about enough here.
Well, and if this also comes down to not wanting to pay the artist, switching gears a little bit back to Zaslav here, but why are you even greenlighting a Soderbergh show that he's
if you're not going to market it?
If you're just going to bury it, like, what is the point? Yeah. Because you don't want to pay Soderbergh residuals or the actors so why are you even doing this in the first place? Like, why are you greenlighting Willow if you're just going to take it off after 2 weeks? What is the point of that? Like, again, to me, that's where the system is broken. It's not because Iger sees numbers on a balance sheet and the math isn't adding up to him. Like, it's broken because you have bad people, bad human beings, as we've talked about, are soulless, cold, and heartless, making decisions, and they don't know anything about art. And they're certainly not making decisions based off of art. And they're often contradicting themselves. Like, none of this makes any sense. Like, to me, that's where it's broken. And but he won't address that. He won't address his contradictions. Like, come on. What are we doing here?
He won't address them, because then that means he knows that he's admitting to his greediness, right? I mean, that's more or less what he'll be doing, and he's not going to do that. But, we're smart enough to realize that that's all that's happening here.
Yeah. I also think it's wild, again, going back to the historical part of this, that earlier today, as we are recording this July 13th, that Oppenheimer had a premiere, I believe, in London. Is that where it was? I'm trying to recall here. I'm not really too sure.
I don't think it was London.
No,
because I know we had a couple.
Maybe Barbie had a London premiere recently.
Yeah, because I know we had a couple film critic. I know we had a couple film critic friends here in the States that got the chance to see Oppenheimer. May have been New York then. Yeah. That's what I think it was.
At any rate, the cast was at the premiere. They're on the red carpet talking about this movie, and of course, because of what's happening, everyone is asking them about the strike. So we're getting loads of quotes from them about all of this as well. And then it's reported that the cast has left the premiere. Like, that is wild. We've never seen anything like this before. The cast left the premiere because of the strike.
I know.
Just wild times.
It's wild times. This is the first time that both the WGA and SAG have been on strike at the same time since, I think 1960 or something like that. Yeah. I did see some stats, so for listeners out there, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I believe it was like since 1980 or something like that, since the last WGA. No, not the WGA strike, but I think since the last SAG strike or something. I don't know, but
I think it was WGA was in 1980.
Yes.
And then it was, I think, 1960 for both of them combined.
That's right, yeah. Now, of course, we had the WGA strike in 2007 as well.
Yes.
And there was also, I think in 2017, there was rumblings that another strike could be happening with the WGA, but I think there was a deal that was solidified that prevented that from happening. But with regard to both of these unions going on strike at the same time, I think the last time that this happened was over 60 years ago. Well, we're in the middle of a history making moment for worse and for worse.
And look,
that's what
the movies this year will, at least the movies themselves will hopefully be great.
Yeah.
Now, from a marketing perspective, things could get really fascinating. They were talking about how these film festivals, like movies could be pulled because the actors won't be able to go there and promote them and talk about them.
I know.
So what are what's the festival circuit going to look like? What is Oscar season going to look like if no one is allowed to promote their work?
Does that mean they can't even show up to accept their award if they win Best Actor or Best Actress?
I don't know.
Like, I don't know
Maybe
how
not.
that part works. Like if that's tied to the union contract.
Well, yeah, we'll have to ask Ryan McQuaid or one of our Oscar friends about that. But
yeah,
I don't. My guess is, like, I don't know. I don't think that I would think they wouldn't be able to, but at the same time, it's the Oscars, so I don't know. Maybe there's a loophole there.
I mean, we might not even have the ceremony if the
it might not
WGA
even
strike is
happen
still
at
happening.
all.
Yeah.
Maybe the awards would just be handed out on paper.
Well, they did that
imagine?
before. You remember that when the Golden Globes did that back in 2007? They just did it during like Entertainment Tonight and just announced winners.
Yeah, because of everything that was going on.
Yeah.
And that kind of gets back to my main point is that, like, movies this year, marketing aside, will be fine. We'll still get to see them. The quality of these films will not be prohibited. However, next year, the year after that, we're going to start to see the ramifications of all of this, and I am nervous.
I'm nervous. I mean, worst case scenario, could this be another COVID-like situation?
Maybe. I mean, because you think about some of the movies that came out in that 2007, 8, 9 era, and you absolutely could see the ramifications of the writer's strike there.
Wow. If we get a summer movie season where the best movie is on the same quality playing field as something like Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Quantum of Solace, which I know it has its defenders. I'm not one of them, but because you could tell it was written, you could tell it was written on the fly, though.
Yeah,
I mean, the script is a problem there.
Yeah, absolutely. At least Revenge of the Fallen didn't pretend to have a script; they just kind of did whatever.
And that's the reason why if something like that were to happen next summer and a movie like that ends up being the best, it'll be because it just takes that in a very self-aware way and embraces its incompleteness, which is, but we don't want to see that. That's the thing. We don't want to see a plethora of movies that feel incomplete. That just makes our job more frustrating.
Well, and that's where the SAG strike becomes interesting, because if there's just a writer strike, you can still make movies. Mm-hmm. You can't do that without actors, though.
Yeah,
unless you're going to
work with actors that are outside that union contract.
Outside the union. But
because I know, like, there are a lot of British actors that are apparently tied to a different union that isn't going on strike. So from what I understand, like, House of the Dragon Season 2 is still going to be filming with those actors because they're part of a different union. So like, in situations like that, it could still work. But that's not going to solve the problem temporarily, right? I mean, that's a subset of those that could potentially still work.
Or you're about to see the same actors in everything, like in all of the movies, same cast.
I mean, we complain about some actors being in everything these days. Now it's going to be very literal.
I know, exactly. I mean, that's the only workaround here, and that's where this may end up being very different than, let's say, the 2007 strike, where
it will be, yeah.
Like Revenge of the Fallen still came out because they could still film that, or Quantum of Solace. Like, the script wasn't there, but actors could still show up. They could shoot them. They could make a movie, and of course, those movies, regardless of quality, still made money. You can't do that without actors, and that's where, with the SAG strike, depending on how long this goes, we might not have movies in, like, next year, and especially the year after that. Like, 2025 could be fascinating, because if this goes on, let's say, for 6 to 8 months, and there's no movies at all being made from those in SAG, which is a lot of actors.
That's potentially a full filming schedule right there. Right?
And that's why I mentioned that specifically, because there's probably already a lot there's probably a lot of movies that are already shot. They just have to be edited and they're in post-production. And so next year, you might not feel it as much. But 2025, when that 6 to 8 month period where the movies for 2025 would be made, if there's nothing at all being made aside from those you were talking about outside of SAG, it could be a very bare year for movies. And God knows the quality of them. Well,
I mean, if we ever have an excuse to go back and review old classics instead of new releases, this is now our time.
Yeah, I just the extreme pessimist in me wants to sit here and say, you know what? Let's enjoy the next week or so. Let's enjoy Barbenheimer because this might be it. Like as far as theaters go, as far as movies go, this could be it. Like enjoy it now. We'll ride high into the sunset because it's all done.
What I'm really hoping is that Barbie and Oppenheimer are both such big hits that they lead to this almost like trickle effect of people going back to the movies for almost everything, that it creates this like, oh, maybe movies have a chance to just be artistic and people will go see them. We'll resolve our differences and come back and, you know, like maybe Barbenheimer will save the industry.
Maybe. I mean,
if they both end up being billion-dollar movies.
Well, and I think the interesting, perhaps tragic irony is that they said that about Top Gun Maverick last year, right? Spielberg was very vocal about this. Top Gun Maverick saved theatrical distribution. We did it. We saved the movies. Good job, everybody. Cut to a year later, and it's all over anyway. Like, you know, because the studios did not learn their lessons and have become extremely greedy, and they don't want to pay their artists, and they don't they have to work out this residual system. I know, like AI is a big part of it. It's residuals. Those are the two key factors. There's probably some more, but it comes down to those two things. I mean, you've been doing this for decades with the cable system. Why does this have to be any different?
True. It's very true.
It doesn't have to be. It doesn't. And I want to know the answer. Like, I want to hear truthfully from the Zaslavs and the Igers of the world why they can't at least do that. Now, if the actors want more than what was there previously, and maybe there's an argument to be made, right? Because with streaming, we can watch these things whenever we want. When it was the cable system, we had to watch them whenever they were on.
Yeah, we had to watch them when they wanted as opposed to when we wanted.
When we want to.
Yeah.
But if I want to go watch Transformers The Last Night 15 times in a row, which I would never do.
Yeah. But here's the thing. You have the power to do that.
I have the right to do that. So, like, you know, or whatever. Like, if I want to watch Greta Gerwig's Lady Bird 64 times in a row, and that's something I might actually do one day.
See, now you're getting to the JD special of it all.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that, you know, like, so how does that work? If I'm watching these movies whenever I want, however many times I want, maybe these artists have a right to want more than what the cable system was. So why can't the studios do that? And maybe that comes down to a larger conversation around streaming and
I mean, I know it's harder
stable it is.
I know it's harder to track than, let's say, like a royalty system that you sometimes see with music these days, depending on its use and its the amount of streams that it gets on, let's say, Spotify or something like that. Those are metrics that are a lot easier to track, but you also have to think that at least streaming platforms should be able to do some similar sense of tracking for certain types of content, for certain genres, for certain films even, that you would think that the actors want some type of, I guess, like repeated residuals from that, right? Like, I get it. I absolutely get it. It's a very different mentality.
And that's what this comes down to.
Yeah.
And right now, the disparity, I forget the actor, but I did read this in an article that there was an actor that had a bit part in one of the Jurassic World movies. And when it was played on TV, his residual was $1,400. in that same time period, he only got like $300 for streaming, for it being played on streaming. That's the disparity we're talking about here.
Wow.
It's massive.
Yeah.
And, so what is from a studio perspective, what is the difference? Is it advertising dollars? Because, okay, well, if the subscription payments themselves, whatever that adds up to, if that's not enough, then is it ads? Well,
that's what I was going to say.
You can incorporate advertising in a similar, like Hulu, I think, does this. Like some of these streamers already do it, but
I mean, cable has all of these sponsored ads in between commercial breaks, which probably help in that regard.
For sure, that's a big part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. But you think of it from a general sense too. If we're disregarding that specific variable, if you're making way less for a bit part on streaming as opposed to cable, I mean, think of it this way. Which of those two options was your bit part watched by the choice of the consumer? And it's the streaming one,
Well,
right?
exactly. And that's why I'm trying to say that the artists these days have more of an argument to want more money than the
From
old
streaming,
system.
as opposed to cable, where in a lot of cases, someone could just be flipping through channels and they accidentally come across your bit part in that moment.
Yeah.
So it's like,
exactly.
I mean, if I were an actor, I would think, I don't care about the residuals for that situation. I'd rather be paid and earned when someone actually wants to watch the product that I took part in.
Yeah. So for that same example, not only do I want my $1,400 for Jurassic World playing on Netflix, I think I want more money. I want $2,600 because people are watching this as many times as they want, whenever they want. So, like, from an actor's perspective or a writer, whatever is your specific field, like, I could understand why they want more. But at the very least, I'm asking, why can't we just do the same? Why can't the status quo just continue? And again, is it just because the subscription dollars aren't enough? And if the answer to that is no, then what is a remedy? Is it advertising dollars a la the cable system? Well, then let's say I'm okay as a consumer to sit through that. We've already become adjusted to that through, decades of watching television. So,
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there are a lot of other people out there, general audiences, that would be frustrated by that. So I don't know, but
that's fair. Yeah. I'm certainly coming at it from a cinephile wanting Hollywood to continue perspective. So that might be selfish of me, but
we know the back end of the business to know what it's actually feeding into to feel at least a sense of peace with that, right?
Yeah.
But most people might not.
Well, and I'll say this, like when I watch a movie on Hulu, for example, now they don't. They don't show ads during the movie, and maybe that's another conversation here because, and maybe that's where you can have different tiers of subscription where I pay X amount of dollars and there's no ads during the movie, and on a lower tier there's ads throughout, like you're watching it on cable.
Well, doesn't that happen on Hulu right now?
And maybe it does.
It does, because I know Maris and I have a lower tier for Hulu, and when I watch a movie, every so often, there will be 1 minute of ads.
Okay. So they've already incorporated that a little bit. Okay, so I don't have that version. I can watch movies all the way through. However, there are still like 3 minutes of ads before the movie. And honestly, I don't mind it because I can hit play and I can go to the kitchen and I can get my snack and my drink and I can kind of get ready as the ads are playing. So by the time I come back, the movie is beginning and I'm ready to go. Yeah. And so it's not an inconvenience to my life necessarily. No. And I think you can condition audiences, and that's a big talking point. We've talked about this a lot over the last few weeks. You can condition audiences however you want.
Yep.
Pixar, looking at you again. Marvel to a certain extent as well. And that's another conversation, I guess. But you can condition audiences to be like, okay, here's a certain amount of ads at this tier. Or a lower tier, here's when you can expect ads. And I still think the consumer will be, they'll still want to consume that art. And,
maybe.
Those movies, because we've done this forever. We've done this forever. It's just a different way of doing it. And you still get the convenience of watching them whenever you want. You know, you don't have to wait for it to come out on cable. You don't even have to walk up to your Blu-ray shelf and get the Blu-ray off and put it into the player. Like,
you don't even have to drive all the way to Blockbuster to find it
you
on
don't
the
have
shelf.
to,
And then,
exactly.
And then realize when you get there, oh, someone already checked it out. Dang it.
I miss that so much, though. If I'm being
I
honest.
actually do miss that. I mean,
I do.
Weirdly, that gave me a sense of peace as well, knowing that I went to Blockbuster to rent a certain movie and it was checked out, knowing, I guess I like something that other people like. That's kind of cool.
If Blockbuster ever made a comeback, I would.
Now is the
day
time.
one.
Now is the time.
Now is a great time, and I would do it. I would be a member day one. If they,
I don't know if this is still the case. As we're talking here, I want to try and do this, but they did make a change to their website that almost got some people talking. This was some months ago, and I don't know if it's still the case. I'm actually going to type this out as we're doing this real time.
I think I did see some tweet about it.
Yeah, if you go to Blockbuster.com, it still says this. It's just the big Blockbuster logo, and it says, "We are working on rewinding your movie."
Wow. Okay.
And it's been like that for months. So maybe Blockbuster.
Maybe they will make a comeback.
Maybe they're trying to pull a movie pass and make a comeback.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine Blockbuster working more than a movie pass if movie pass uses the same business module that they had before. But I mean,
if
maybe
they market
this is the
it
time.
right, yeah, I think it would be, especially given the problem streaming is having right now, and they might just have enough of a nostalgia factor with people like myself that
target the millennials. I mean, they're the ones who are mostly invested in this. And if we learned anything from Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, or at least something it tried to teach us, analog, baby.
Analog. Gotta go analog. Exactly.
I mean, bring the typewriters back while we're at it.
The AIs are after us. Yeah, I mean, we haven't gotten to our Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning conversation yet. That will be recorded by the time this episode goes live. I'm not sure the order of the releases. That review will probably be out already, I would say. But yeah, the timing of Dead Reckoning and what we saw today is hilarious. It's so funny.
So how many people own this time machine? Lucas, Spielberg, and Tom Cruise, I think, so far?
I guess so. Like, this movie was already going to do well at the box office, but now, after today, I can only imagine what it's going to go crazy.
Especially with the word of mouth around its quote-unquote entity. Yeah, the entity itself, starts to carry some weight and people start realizing what the film is actually about. That's going to spark a lot of curiosity for people to see.
I think so. It is really funny, that timing, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right, Brennan, let's talk about some coffee. Given this conversation, we need it.
I'm exhausted.
It's exhausting. There's a lot to maybe not look forward to when it comes to Hollywood and cinema in the next few years. However, you can always look forward to Coffee Cult because it is delicious.
It's a stress reliever as well. We need our stress relieved.
Right exactly.
Just the aroma, just the smell.
The aroma of it, the quality, the taste. Coffee Cult sources only specialty grade Arabica beans from over 50 countries around the world, meaning the quality of this coffee is unmatched. I learned this last week that they don't know what specialty grade means. And look, it's understandable. Before working with Coffee Cult, I didn't either. But what that means is you're talking about gourmet coffee, the best coffee that is out there. And that's all they roast, and they roast it in a very specific way to get the best flavors out of it. And they have a great variety of coffees. This is sometimes something that maybe we don't emphasize enough, because they have coffees that are really fruity and citrusy that I particularly love. Like, they have a new Colombian IPE that, no joke, tastes like strawberries. It tastes like blueberries. It is incredible.
And it's amazing that you're getting that type of taste and it's not artificially added. Like, that is a natural byproduct of what they're actually making.
It's how the coffee is produced, how it is processed, how it is roasted. Those are all natural, 100% natural flavors. And then there's other coffees like their Peru or their Komodo Dragon, which have
Sumatra, baby.
Or
Sumatra,
the Sumatra.
So good.
Sumatra is another one where it has like these nutty, chocolatey flavors. So just depending
it's a great
on
dessert drink.
It's incredible. So they have all kinds of great coffees that you'll love. They source coffee from farms that pay their workers fairly and equally. So ethically sourcing the beans is very important to them as well.
You hear that, Hollywood? Coffee Cult does it right.
They do it right. They're not about greed, turns out.
They are not. They're not replacing their beans with AI beans.
No, they are not. And right now, if you go to coffeecult.com, that's coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. When you place your order at checkout, use the code ISF and you'll get 15% off. Again, that's ISF, coffeecult.com. The InSession Film Podcast is brought to you by our great friends over at First Time Watchers. And Brendan, we are talking about the end of Hollywood, which is really quite something, because First Time Watchers also ending their show soon. Maybe appropriately. Who knows?
Well,
maybe we'll all be joining them soon.
Well, we'll talk about that. Maybe first-time watchers have a reason to end their show given their last episode. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is a really great show that we urge people to go and check out. We do love them.
Yeah, and in all transparency, we are sad to hear that they are ending at 500 episodes. They just released episode 498, so they are getting very close to the end, but they are a great supporter of our show. They've always been a great supporter of our show, and we've always been a great partner with them as well. At least we hope that we were. Hosted by our great friends, Tim, Walter, and Hermano. And we've been promoting their show all this time through this partnership because we love their banter and we love their knowledge of movies. And we think you listening, if you've never listened to them before, we think you'll love it too. Yeah,
we've partnered with First Time Watchers since the beginning. They were one of the first podcasts to reach out to us when we first started back in 2013, 10 years ago. Yeah. And so it's a little bittersweet to see them near the end. On their
Well, not only that as well, JD, and we talked about this on their latest episode, but when you were nice enough to bring me on to InSession Film on the extra film segment as it was, you know, my very first ever guest spot on another film podcast was the First Time Watchers. It was Tim asking me to join, and I was like, this is awesome. I don't know who these guys are, but I love being asked to do this more. That means a lot, and I really appreciated that.
Speaking of guest appearances, on their latest episode, we joined them. Brendan and I were on that show, 498. And you know what movie we talked about? Not Hirokazu Greta, not Greta Gerwig, not Christopher Nolan. No, we talked about Cars 3. Yes, you heard me right. Pixar's Cars 3. Why? Only God knows. But that's
Ka-chow. Ka-chow indeed.
The real story is Tim asked us for a few suggestions, and I threw out Greta and maybe one other like real suggestion. And at the end, as a slight joke, because it's well known in InSession film circles that Brendan and I's review of Cars 3 was weirdly very polarizing. We had a heated debate over Cars 3. So as a joke, I'm like, oh, Brendan would like to talk about Cars 3 again. Ha, 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 ha. Thinking that it would just come off as a joke. But no, They did not take it that way. They called our bluff and was like, we're talking about it. So that's what they did. And we talked about it.
So it's your fault.
Yeah.
It's always your fault in this case now. I wanted to blame Tim and give him so much crap, but the second you threw that out there, even as a joke, I knew Tim's going to pick that one, isn't he?
I mean, I thought that it would just be taken as a joke, but the joke is on me instead. So I do apologize. At any rate, we had a fun conversation, if one can call it that, about Cars 3.
I mean, we had a conversation. I think it ended up being a fun product to listen to. I did go back and listen to how the final product ended up being, and it's a good conversation regardless of the film that we were forced to talk about and sit back and watch again, which for transparency, I don't like Cars 3 at all, but I think the conversation was really great. It certainly veers away from what we usually see from first-time watchers as they close things out on episode 500 coming up soon, because usually they'll pick out a movie that they've never seen and give a real fresh perspective on it. That's the term first-time watchers for you. But I really love their banter in that way. They're picking out different types of content with varying guests to close things out in a very celebratory way, and I'm glad that we got a chance to at least be a part of that, even if it was, Pixar's Cars 3 that brought us, together. But still, great conversation, great show, really unique show.
Yeah, absolutely. So you want to go check these guys out. It's a really smart show. Fun show, and they pick weird films to talk about sometimes. So, Brandon, where can you find these guys on the internet?
Well, you can check them out at firstttimewatchers.podbean.com, and that's first spelled out FIRST, timewatchers.podbean.com. Also hit them up on Twitter at First Time Watchers, on Instagram also at First Time Watchers, and on Facebook by simply searching for First Time Watchers.
And go subscribe to them on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave them a review. Let them know how much you love and adore their show. At the end of your review, we ask that you leave a little hashtag so they know we sent it to them. And this week, let's go with the hashtag, it was Tim's fault. Not mine. It was Tim's fault.
I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. I saw the message thread. I saw the chats. I saw the evidence.
Yeah, it was a joke. And they did not take it that way. At any rate, go check them out. We promise you'll love them. That is First Time Watchers. All right, let's go ahead and transition to what this show was supposed to really be about.
Okay, we're going to have to make this one quick now.
Yeah, because we came into this episode wanting to do, we wanted a Barbenheimer episode. That's what we wanted to do here. And, we were trying to figure out various ways to, to honor the Barbenheimer movement. And, we threw out some ideas. I thought what was maybe the most appropriate, given some of the shows we've done over the last few months, is to do a Greta Gerwig and Christopher Nolan combined, right? Because we're combining Barbenheimer. That's what everyone's doing. Whether it be the name or the posters, the merchandise, everything has them together.
Yes.
So let's talk about the filmographies of Nolan and Gerwig together. Specifically, let's come to a consensus ranking of those two filmmakers. Because combined, there are some bangers here.
It's a pretty good long filmography. And honestly, people were doing this for so long earlier this year and last year with for lack of a better term, that three-way ranking between three horror directors working today with Ari Aster, Robert Eggers and Jordan Peele. People were combining their filmography and ranking all three of them. So I guess it's a common trend now. It's not out of the norm. If people are combining it already, Barbenheimer is a thing. Someone made a fan poster for it already.
Oh, there's been many posters, many graphics.
It's pretty interesting that given how much bigger Nolan's filmography is, this might come off as a Nolan ranking with some Gerwig in some ways, but
look, it's the Gerwig Nolan combination. I mean, she's only done 4 films to Nolan's 10, 11 with Oppenheimer, I believe.
With Oppenheimer, it's 12.
12. Okay, so
yes.
in the neighborhood there.
Yeah.
So we're going to do it. We're going to come to a consensus ranking here.
Oh, we're gonna try to. I'm very excited for this. I will throw out a caveat, though, at the very beginning, because Brennan has not seen Gerwig's co-directed effort with Joe Swanberg, Nights and Weekends. Right, yeah. Sadly, I haven't had a chance to see that. I heard it's pretty good. Yeah. I hear it's okay.
I like it. No, I like it. And I say that as not just a fan of Gerwig, but also Joe Swanberg. I actually really like Swanberg's
Does it have a little bit more of a mumblecore kind of vibe to it?
Comparatively to a lot of their Gerwig's other works, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not quite what Swanberg would be known for in the 2010s, but it certainly has. I would say it's been a while since I've seen it, but certainly a way more laid back style than Lady Bird and Little Women, that have much more of a structure to it for sure.
That would make sense.
So let's do a consensus ranking here. Now, obviously, as of this recording, we haven't seen Barbie or Oppenheimer, so those will also be excluded here. But Nights and Weekends will be last, and honestly, it would probably be last on my list anyway. Maybe.
Really?
I might like it more than Following. I like it more than Following, I think.
Even can I ask another question that maybe gets a little ahead of ourselves, but even more than The Dark Knight Rises?
Oh, you know what? I hadn't even thought about that. But yeah, I probably like it more than Dark Knight Rises.
I'll be honest. Like I feel like I'm playing my cards a little bit early. I mean, I really like Christopher Nolan, but I do think he has at least a few stinkers.
Yeah, I'd have to rewatch the film. It's been a while. I mean, because I do like Nights and Weekends. I do like it. Is it a better movie than Dark Knight Rises? Probably, but I feel like I'd have to revisit both of them to say concretely.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I'd say as of now that we're talking about it out loud. But for the sake of this exercise, we'll put Nights and Weekends at the bottom since you haven't seen it, just to be fair.
Okay, yeah, because I can't give it a fair shake and try and say that I think it's better than The Dark Knight Rises, even though, cynically speaking, given how much I like The Dark Knight Rises, I'm going to assume I'm going to like Nights and Weekends more. I'll simply say that.
Or, you know what, we could, I know you haven't seen it, so maybe you can, depending on our conversation with Dark Knight Rises here.
So how about this?
Maybe we'll include it.
Why don't you put Nights and Weekends on the bench for a little bit until we kind of, let's go through what we've collectively seen, talk about them. Maybe it'll help you formulate your thoughts on where we want to put it after the fact.
Yeah, that's fair. I like that idea.
Okay.
Obviously, this is going to be Nolan heavy. He has just a lot more films at this point, but still, it is all about combining these two directors. Yeah. So that's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's start with this then, and we're doing this as a consensus ranking, and so let's just go through this the way we did with the Disney movies, with Following. How do you feel about that movie?
Oh, I think this is a fascinating movie. I don't love it. I feel like it's Nolan sort of experimenting with what his not really his style, but what his narrative style would be, right? Because we sometimes see a lot of early filmmakers do a lot of aesthetic experimentation, but he doesn't really do that here. I feel like from an aesthetic standpoint, Following is pretty bare bones, and I think that's what worked mostly in its favor. But you could definitely sense he's experimenting with non-linear story structuring and narrative and surprises. And you could definitely sense a lot of where his filmography would go from this movie, even just based on some of the character names that would be recycled in, let's say, Inception, for instance.
Yeah.
So the bones are there, and I think it's a very fascinating movie. I think why it also works overall is that it's short. It's just over an hour long. It might as well be a short film.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a fascinating movie. It's not my favorite because I think it's one of those cases where his narrative style would become way more refined and more mathematical as he would go on. So a few holes there for sure, but I think it's a fascinating movie.
I agree. I think it is a promising debut. Its neo-noir drama, I think, is fascinating, especially given its budget, given its time restraints, as you noted there. And I know this is going to come as a shock, and you talked about it, Brendan. He experiments with structure and writing a narrative. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought?
Who would have thought? I mean, unbelievable. And I love that about Christopher Nolan. It certainly replicates itself many times over in his movies, and it's what makes him, one of our most compelling, each time. And I imagine he's going to do that in some way with Oppenheimer. So
yeah. And with regard to following, I do like the central performance from Jeremy Theobald, I believe his name is.
Yes.
Maybe not the most well-rounded character in a Nolan film, but he is fascinating to watch at the very least.
I agree.
I'll at least say that.
I agree. At this point, it's number one on the list.
It's number one.
All right. Memento. Oh, my goodness, Memento.
All right, new number one.
New number one. Yeah.
I don't know how hard I'll be able to fight for this one. I'll just come out and say it. This is my favorite Christopher Nolan film. Depending on the conversation we have about other ones, JD, I could probably be swayed to put it a little bit lower, just given maybe the technical significance of some of his other films. But everything we talked about with Following and the experimentation with structure and narrative, I feel like is really when he started to perfect that in Momentum. Or Memento. The momentum of that movie was just so good. I'm starting to confuse words here. I love the way that the narrative is basically following two separate paths that'll eventually conjoin in the middle, and that ending is really the beginning. I also think it's one of Nolan's best efforts at fusing like tragedy with comedy. I think it's also a very funny movie at times. We often talk about Nolan being, well, not you and I. I'm talking about the royal we. We sometimes see comments about Nolan's coldness, which I don't often agree with.
I don't agree with that at all.
No, I think Memento is a clear example as to why I don't agree with it, and not just because I think it's a tragic love story about memory and remembrance, and just from a relatable standpoint, what you're trying to hold on to that you've lost. It doesn't matter if you have short-term memory loss or not. But it's a funny movie. I think Guy Pearce is kind of hilarious at times. The wittiness of his voiceover, I think, is really clever. So I think it's a very well-rounded Nolan film. And I love the bare bones of it, too, without getting so heavily, distracted by other things. Not that he usually does, but I think it's a wonderful film. This is my favorite one. But, I mean, I could, depending on the conversation, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I really love this film as well. I actually just rewatched it earlier this year. I was fortunate enough to guest on a podcast called Time to Rewind. And
okay, nice.
And so that podcast is fascinating because it essentially breaks down, it goes like scene by scene. And so I came on that episode to talk about 3 specific scenes, which lent itself to 3 different episodes. It's really great. So if people want to go and check that out. And I am with you. I think that film is absolutely fascinating. Its lead character, this unreliable narrator, the experimenting with structure and writing once again, it is utterly fascinating. It's sometimes thrilling. I agree with you. It's funny. It's unexpected. Yeah, it truly runs the gamut. And Guy Pearce, man, what a performance. Striking performance.
I agree.
And I agree with you about the emotion. I will push back heavily against that idea. In fact, I struggled to wrap my mind around it. I don't know how people don't see the emotion of his movies. It's very much there. I don't think it's...
Yeah, there are some where he tries to do that, and I don't think he quite succeeds. We'll get there. We'll get there. But,
Yeah.
I mean, at the very least, I feel like you can't say he's not trying to give his film some sense of drama.
And I'm not talking about successes. I'm simply
Right.
talking about the absence of emotion. That idea, I think, is utterly absurd. And in several of his films, it's incredibly strong. Memento certainly being one of those. So
Yeah.
I quite love that one as well. So
Yeah.
I imagine this will be very high on the list when it's all said and done here.
I hope so.
So last year we did our 2002 retrospective, which included Insomnia. I believe we talked about this briefly offline.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, you're not the biggest fan of this.
I'm mixed on it. And part of it is that this is the Nolan film that feels like he was just a director for hire for me. I don't think it's a bad movie. I actually think it's a well-performed movie. Really what saves it is, the Al Pacino and the Robin Williams of it all. I think they're really hypnotic together, and I love that whole aspect of it. I think there's a fascinating idea here that more or less probably existed in the I guess the Swedish film that it's based on. I think it was a Swedish film. That it, like this idea of a very despondent cop that believes he's doing good by doing bad, right? I think that's a very fascinating idea. I don't feel a lot of Nolan in it. And that's why I rank it a little bit lower than perhaps you do, even despite me at least recognizing it's a fairly entertaining thriller, though. I wish I felt more of Nolan in it.
And I think that's fair. I think that's where you have to somewhat, at least for me, I would argue you have to separate it a little bit because it's not necessarily a Christopher Nolan movie. In that regard, I don't even know if it's close. It's the least of his movies as it relates to his thumbprint. But I do think it's a solid thriller. I think it's really well done. It's not one of the best films of 2002, but I think Al Pacino and Robin Williams especially, I think they're really good. They're committed in their performances, and I think it's it's sharply told. It is Nolan as a director for hire, but it's also Christopher Nolan, and I don't think he necessarily pulls punches necessarily as much as he's simply working within the confines of what is given to him and perhaps what he was told. But I think he does it well.
Yeah.
Nolan I don't think he's capable of just phoning it in wholly.
I agree.
And so Insomnia, I still think is a good movie, and one that's very entertaining to watch, but it certainly lacks the Nolanisms. There's no doubt about that. I do agree there.
Which is why of the three we've talked about thus far, I would probably rank it third. Even if I might think of it as a more efficient thriller when compared to something like Following, it's Nolan's thumbprint that I at least find more fascinating in Following. Which is why I would still put it up. I mean, that's me. I don't know if you feel any differently.
Well, and this is where it's going to get interesting comparatively to what we did before with Ryan and Jay, because it's now just the two of us.
Yeah.
I probably would put it above Following, but at the same time, I'm not passionate enough about it that I'm willing to debate it, if that makes sense.
I feel you on that. So if I may, I will suggest let's put Insomnia below Following just because of the significance of Nolan's growth as a filmmaker is being represented in those early stages of Following. I think the experimentation is so Nolan in Following. I kind of feel like we need to at least put it slightly above.
Okay. Sounds good to me. So on to Batman Begins in 2005. What do you think?
I love this movie.
Okay.
This is my favorite in the Dark Knight trilogy.
Boy. Here comes the pitchforks.
I can't say it's the best movie of the three because as we'll talk about with The Dark Knight, that movie is just so well crafted. and it's a wonderfully balanced ensemble piece. It's basically Michael Mann's Heat, right? I mean, the casting of William Finkner alone shows how Nolan is wearing his influence on his sleeve. He is not hiding that. The Dark Knight is a Michael Mann movie. It absolutely is.
That
it's a very good
shot is straight. If you told me Michael Mann directed that opening, I'd be like, yeah, I believe it.
And I think
totally,
and maybe that's partially why I like Batman Begins slightly more, because I think I can feel the darkness of Nolan creeping into that one a little bit more.
Okay.
Like maybe some more of the gothic isms that we kind of sensed in something like Following, for instance, right? I really appreciate that, and I think just selfishly speaking, I've always loved Batman movies where Batman himself is front and center. The Dark Knight is an ensemble piece. You know, it's about every character working together in some ways at the service of that script, and that's what makes that film work. I've just always really enjoyed Christian Bale's portrayal of Bruce Wayne and Batman, and I think Batman Begins taps into that psychology in a way that I've always appreciated from the Batman ethos. And so it's more of a selfish pick as to why I rank it so high in that trilogy, even if I think that maybe some of the other ones, like The Dark Knight, is a better crafted movie. But I mean, I'm getting a little ahead of myself by talking about The Dark Knight simultaneously. But I mean, I feel like this is going to go long.
It's hard
we might have to do that just to save some time here. But
and that's I think that's perfectly reasonable. In fact, if you just want to, I think for the sake of time, we can just do the Batman trilogy here.
You want to just do them all together?
So you might as well.
All right.
I guess just to jump in real fast, I am Dark Knight, Batman Begins, Rises. That's the order for me here. But the disparity between The Dark Knight and Batman Begins is pretty slim. I also really love Batman Begins. I think really the only difference for me is that The Dark Knight, I truly do believe, is one of Nolan's best movies and one of the very best this genre has ever seen. It is incredible in its craftsmanship, the performances, that striking tone throughout that film. Batman Begins is really great. I do think at times, at least comparatively, I think it succumbs to its tropes a little bit.
I don't necessarily disagree with that.
And that's
especially
really the
in
only
its
disparity for me.
Yeah,
that's it.
At least in its third act. But then you have someone like Liam Neeson who just sells the hell out of that villainous role. That I kind of just go with it, even if it is very tropey.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that. It just, but I do think as far as it being a Batman-centric movie, it does the right thing in doing that as a first installment in a trilogy. So that way we at least know the character. So when it turns into an ensemble piece like it does in The Dark Knight, it's not like we're trying to get reintroduced to Batman all over again, right?
Yes.
Like the work had been done. So I've heard some people say with The Dark Knight that Bruce Wayne himself has not much of an arc until maybe the final 10 minutes. And I kind of agree, but I don't think that's really a bad thing. I mean, it's more about that balancing act to lead into that final act there, which I think mostly works in that film's favor. It just depends on what you prefer to see out of those when Batman is front and center.
I mean, if we're talking about it in the context of a trilogy too, I do like that the film takes its time in building up Bruce and what is driving that psychology. And I think the film does a great job with that. In fact, I wish more trilogies would take their time with setting up their characters in that way, because we do come to learn much more about them when we get to The Dark Knight, and then you get to the politics of The Dark Knight Rises and where he leans and all of that as well. I guess even the politics of The Dark Knight as well.
Sure.
So we learn much more about Bruce in the latter two films. I do like that about Batman Begins. It's really just the trappings of it that, you know, it succumbs to slightly. And again, that's a slight criticism. It's just why, to me, it's a hair below The Dark Knight. Is why I even bring that up. But
yeah, and when I'm looking at my own personal ranking of Christopher Nolan, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight are still back to back. Which so I think I have it at like number 4 and 5 respectively or something like that, which means kind of like your lack of passion for defending Insomnia over Following. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, Batman Begins needs to be above The Dark Knight. I'm not going to do that. So when we do our collective ranking, I am more than okay putting The Dark Knight above it and just looking at it more objectively because of the importance it served to the superhero genre.
Exactly. That's undeniable.
With that regard, I just want it to be known I prefer the other outing, but I recognize that The Dark Knight made a much bigger cultural impact, and that can't be ignored.
And then there's The Dark Knight Rises, which you and I are not fans of. And
I think it's bad. I think it's so bad. I think it is far and away Nolan's worst movie.
Okay. Yeah. I'd have to rewatch it to maybe go that far. But you see, I don't know if I like it, worse than something like Insomnia. But I don't think this is a very good movie. And I talked about how Insomnia might not have the Nolan thumbprint. I still think it's a good movie. It's solid. It's well told. I can't say that about The Dark Knight Rises.
No, it has Nolan's thumbprint, but it's not a good movie.
Yeah.
See, it's kind of the opposite
Actually,
problem.
Talking about this out loud, I'm just speaking nonsense. So, yeah, I guess this is the worst film of his that we've talked about so far. I would like to rewatch it. It's been a long time since I've given this a go.
I think it has good moments and good scenes. I think in totality, it's one of those classic examples where the film is way less than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
And because there are individual components that are very good. I think the opening 10 or 15 minutes, that whole plane heist is wonderful. It's immaculate. It's great.
I agree. Yeah.
And some of the action beats are overall okay, but I think as a final product, it just I think it completely misses the mark. And one of my biggest problems with it too, and I realize this is probably something that was out of Nolan's control, but the change in location. Like we're still in Gotham City, right? I mean, that's the same for all three of these movies. But The Dark Knight Rises was filmed in Pittsburgh as opposed to Chicago. And it feels like a different place. It really feels like a different place. And maybe that's because I live in Pennsylvania, so I know Pittsburgh fairly well, so I'm able to recognize some of that a little bit more closely. But like it weirdly makes it feel like it's such an aesthetic outlier from the trilogy in some ways. And I don't think it works in its favor in the trilogy's totality. I just don't think it works then.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I will say this, I guess to be a little fair, in a vacuum, I always love me some Tom Hardy. And I love that this role has become somewhat of a meme. Like it's, it's been impersonated to death. And
on this podcast many times when we still had Jay and Ryan here.
They were doing it all the time. Yeah, I kind of love that Tom Hardy has become synonymous with this role. Anne Hathaway's Catwoman, again, in a vacuum, I like. Did the film utilize her well is a different argument. But the character and Hathaway's portrayal of her, I did appreciate. And Michael Caine in all of these movies is just wonderful as Alfred.
It's just Michael Caine.
He's Michael Caine. He's great. So, I believe you noted this as well. Like, yes, the film has its moments that are quite great. And so I want to avoid the extremisms. Like I don't hate this movie necessarily. I don't think I think it's a very messy movie. Narratively, there's a lot to be desired, but it has its moments that I very much do appreciate. But as we talk about it, I do think this is probably my least favorite of those that we've talked about so far.
So we'll agree that The Dark Knight Rises goes at the bottom. Now the fun part begins, trying to place Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. Let's start with the easy one, because I feel like you and I would at least agree, because right now we have Memento following Insomnia, and then The Dark Knight Rises. I think we'll agree Batman Begins should go number 2, just below Memento.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then the question becomes, where the heck do we put The Dark Knight? Like to you, is that number 1 so far?
No. I think Memento stays at number 1 right now.
Thank God. Thank God. That's I was ready to have this debate here, trying to push for Memento at number 1, but
yeah.
While I did say I do prefer Batman Begins, I'll still go ahead and put The Dark Knight above it because of that cultural significance that it has. So then we'll put that as number 2 in this ranking thus far.
Yeah, I think that's a fair compromise too. So, and also I noted I rewatched Memento earlier this year. That certainly helped solidify it for me a little bit. If I hadn't have had that rewatch, maybe it'd be a little bit more debatable. But Memento is so good. It is so good.
It's so good.
I don't know. I don't think there's a false note in that film.
I think when we get to was that a 2001 film or is that 2000? Because we have a retrospective coming
2000.
up soon.
Yeah, 2000.
Oh, dang it. Okay, because I was going to say, if we have to talk about this film yet again for our 2001 retrospective, it's going to get dangerous.
Yes.
But yeah, okay. We'll save that for next year when we get to that next one.
Okay, so now we'll go backwards in time. We're going to Nolan this a little bit.
We're going to Nolan this, yeah.
So, The Prestige, 2006, I believe that came out. So, what do you think about The Prestige?
Really good movie, fascinating movie. I think if there's anything I would have preferred to see it do is maybe lean a little bit more into the potential camp of it, because it is at times kind of a silly movie, which is something I do like about it. But at the same time, I do think it gets into this idea of obsession and the competitive nature of your occupation in a very magical way. I think that's all very fascinating. But this is a movie that features the late great David Bowie as Nikola Tesla. You can really have a lot more fun with that, and I'm not sure if Nolan quite does, but I think it's a fascinating story. It's a fascinating story, and I'm glad it exists in the way that it does, because clearly it's something that Nolan wanted to make in his own way. It's one of the earliest examples of the one for you, one for me mentality, because he already gave Warner Brothers Batman Begins, and it was such a huge hit. They said, you need to do a sequel. So he said, okay, let me make my own movie first. And then he makes The Prestige and then makes The Dark Knight.
Yeah, love that.
So I have to respect The Prestige for being part of that narrative that we often see even more so nowadays with certain filmmakers. Nolan's not the only one doing that anymore. So for those reasons, I have a lot of respect for the film regardless of its quality. But thankfully, I still think it's a very good movie.
Yeah, I quite love The Prestige. I think it is really great. However, I will throw in a caveat there in the sense that if I take a step back and I look at it, especially narratively, I do think it is quite easily one of Nolan's most contrived movies. But if you're willing to buy the narrative conveniences and the rivalry and the odd sci-fi element at the end.
I was going to say, and the magic, the literal magic of it all. See, this is why I think if it would have embraced maybe some of that camp a little bit, maybe we could have gotten away with some of those contrivances a little bit.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, but I do think if you're willing to submit to the process and all of its twists and turns, I think the ballet of it is quite poetic. And there's a lot of fun to be had, especially with these performances. And I found it extremely engaging. So,
it's a very entertaining movie.
It's interesting, too, like what rewatches will do, because this is one of those where on a first viewing, I could not get past those contrivances. And I found the film kind of tedious, I guess. And then I rewatched it. I succumbed to what the film was wanting to do, and I honestly kind of loved it on that rewatch. Ended up really falling for it.
I think a lot of it comes down to it being a very good performative film.
Yes,
it's a well acted film. I'm not sure how well the film would work for me if you didn't have actors as talented as Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman and Scarlett Johansson being able to convey what needed to be conveyed. Even Rebecca Hall in some of her moments as well, I think, are surprisingly tender. And this rivalry between our two leads, you kind of buy into. If you don't buy into it, the movie does not work at all. So that certainly helps, maybe despite its contrivances that you're talking about there.
Yeah, and I do like its ideas on obsession, because it goes out of its way to depict like how far you're really willing to go to get your hands dirty.
Oh yeah,
and
it has
it's brutal at times.
And the way it treats those themes of obsession really remind me of like classic Hitchcock in some ways. This is probably Nolan at his most old-fashioned, and I don't mean that literally because of the time period that it takes place in. It actually feels like a movie that could have been told in this same tonal way in like the 1960s or something like that, which I kind of like about it. So again, if it would have embraced maybe the camp a little bit more, I could have gotten over some of those contrivances. But as it is, I think it's a very fascinating and entertaining movie. In this list thus far, so right now we have Memento, The Dark Knight, and Batman Begins in the top 3. I could put this at number 4.
That's where I was going to say
okay.
4. Yeah.
All right. Once again, we think a lot alike, my friend.
There. All right, now this is going to get fascinating. So let's move on to 2010's Inception.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I might take the lead here because I love this movie. In fact, I might be a little bit against the grain in how much I love it. I think this film is really great, and it's also one of those movies where, like, it quintessentially to me is why I push back against the idea that Nolan's films have no emotion. And I think this film is full of it. I think it is extreme. I think the performances and all of that are incredible.
Yeah.
And boy, oh boy, do I love that ending, but not for the same reasons as everybody else. Like, I could care less about the top and the ambiguity of all of that. Although it certainly is interesting, but that moment when Cobb comes back and there's a reverse shot where we see Cobb, we see his eyes gazed into the distance where he can see his children. It cuts to the children turning around, realizing their father had come home. Yeah. And you get that next cut to Cobb. That moment of performance there is so good.
DiCaprio, baby.
DiCaprio. Incredible. And you couple that with Hans Zimmer's most iconic score. I don't even think it is a debate anymore. That track, Time, is everywhere. It is transcended time and space. It really has. And look, I'm not necessarily saying his score on the whole is his best score.
No, but it's his best track from a score. That
track has infiltrated the culture in a way that few others have. Although certainly it's Hans Zimmer, so there are others that have taken hold of the zeitgeist as well. But I don't know if any of them have reached the peaks that one did, especially, we'll say, from 2010 to 2015, 16, 17. That time, or that track was in everything, all kinds of media, trailers, videos. It was on YouTube, all kinds of shows. It was repurposed in everything. And I think the brilliance of the score as well is, regardless of however it was used, it just works for everything. Like, it's so good. It is so good. And so to me, it's certainly one of the best scores of that year. And it does help heighten that sense of emotion that you get there at the end. And I also love the subtlety of what we see there too, because DiCaprio doesn't say anything. It's just the way he gazes at his children and that sense of closure, that sense of peace, and that sense of, I'm glad to be back with my children, that I think helps accompany everything that we had seen previously. It is so good. So, like, to me, that's why that film is great. I mean, when you talk about Nolan and going inside the dreams and the plotting of it and the fun of it all, the staging, like the practicality of the stunt works and stuff, like, all of that is also great. We don't have time to get into it all, but I think that, like, Inception has just become one of those popular movies that people have been counterintuitive because it's popular, and a notion that I kind of loathe.
But I think part of that might also be because it's kind of like the Interstellar problem where he over explains a lot of things, and with Inception, there is a lot of rules that have to be established with how this works, and maybe the argument could be that there shouldn't be as many rules for dream logic like this, but I think that's kind of one of its most fascinating elements.
I agree.
I think I could certainly understand a criticism that maybe Nolan over-explains himself with, let's say, a movie like Interstellar, which we'll talk about, but I kind of like the expository nature of Inception. I've always found that kind of fascinating because it makes the audience part of the process.
Especially when you consider the visuals and how it accompanies that exposition. It's not simple framing where characters are talking to the camera or talking to another character. That's part of it, but he accompanies that exposition with a lot of visuals to help articulate what we're about to get into. And it is a little sophisticated. It's a little convoluted. So he has to be a little explaining in that way. But I think he does it extremely well. Like the execution, I just think is high. And once you get into it, once we start to experience the dreams within dreams, it's extremely captivating and thrilling and just a lot of fun. So, my point is like it just became like its popularity got to level where people then started to push back because like that's the internet thing to do. But I truly think it's one of his very best movies.
Oh, I think a lot of people are going back to the film now and realizing, oh, it actually is a very good movie. I think that pushback that you're talking about was maybe more instantaneous because the hype was so big around it at the time it came out in, was this 2010? I think it was. Maybe it was just so early at that point. But now I hear a lot of people ranking this as one of Nolan's better movies.
And it's my favorite of his thematically in terms of process and coping and the murkiness of reality and dreams. Like all of that is so good.
I think it's his best ending for sure, or at least one of his best endings. Maybe we'll talk about a different one later. I think the only disparity you and I might have is where do we rank it, number 1 or number 2? Because this is top 3 Nolan for me. I don't know if I made that quite clear. I love this movie. I agree with everything that you said. I do prefer Memento. So if I'm ranking this based on the films we're talking about thus far, it would be my number 2 between those two there, but I mean, if you're feeling more number 1, I could certainly be persuaded to give it the edge given the craftsmanship of it.
I mean, I personally might have this a little higher than Memento, but they're both, honestly, I feel about them the same in that regard. So, man, it's hard to say, like, because it's
kind of a coin flip. I'm almost tempted to put Inception at number 1 because it comes first alphabetically.
There you go. Like, I mean, for me, like, I think it kind of comes down to if we're going to get really nitpicky, and I'm not going to be negative toward Memento as much as I am like the thematic prowess of Inception, and that ending to me just elevates it to maybe just a hair above Memento. But
yeah. At the same time, I think, they're very different movies narratively and structurally, but I think Memento had the harder task at being as efficient as it was. It might be arguably a tighter film in that regard, but they're doing so many different things, it might not be a fair comparison in that way. I am more moved by Inception. I do not disagree with that.
It's hard.
I feel like I feel like maybe we could just tie that. Why don't we just, I'll put Inception at number 1 now, just for the sake of the emotionality of it, to really push back on the coldness that people tend to feel with Nolan.
Okay.
So maybe
for that alone.
Just for that alone. Just to use it as, fuel for this debate that people have with him. But I do prefer Memento. Like I said, that's my favorite Nolan film, so that will always be number 1 for me with regard to unless Oppenheimer comes out and destroys it. But yeah, I'm okay with putting these 2 as they are right now.
Okay, well, this is going to get interesting. I imagine, because I do think people are kind of coming in, like reevaluating Inception and coming back to it as one of Nolan's best.
Yeah.
Interstellar is, I don't know if it's polarizing. A lot of people really love this movie, though. And I think that we're going to turn some people off here, but I'm so conflicted on Interstellar.
I think this is the most frustrating film I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I'm dead serious. There are moments here where I think it's one of the greatest movies ever made.
Yes.
And then there are other moments that I think it's some of the worst stuff Nolan has ever done.
Yes.
And a lot of it really comes down to the script. There's a lot that has been said already that the original writing here, courtesy of Jonathan Nolan, Chris's brother, it was originally meant to be a Spielberg production. And it's not even the emotionality of it. It's my biggest problem with the movie is the literal dialogue that just does not feel natural, and the leading into so many conveniences to get to where it needs to go. That just, I feel like we can be here for 2 hours just talking about examples that don't work for us from a narrative standpoint. I don't want to do that for the sake of time, but there are many I can think of that I don't. It's not even just the choices it makes from a story standpoint. It's the maneuvering of that story. It's the explaining of how a wormhole works between two characters who are already on their mission, who should know this shit already. It's like, that's the problem right there. It's the machinations of it.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Yeah, you're certainly not wrong. And that's very different than something like Inception, right? When Cobb is explaining what they're about to get into, he's doing that to a character that has no clue what's going on.
Yeah.
The audience surrogate, if you will.
Yeah.
That is not the case here with Inception. It is two scientists in space already.
Yeah.
Having those conversations. I agree with you. I'll just say this quickly. I revisited this film in May of 2018. Okay. So we are a few months away from First Man coming out. Yeah. And I have talked incessantly on this show what that film did to me emotionally, destroyed me. At this time, Sam was at 2.5, about to turn 3. So he was at an age where my fatherhood was still kind of new. I was still very much feeling my emotions. And so it was a right time to go back and watch this movie. And I bring up First Man because to show as evidence that when we're talking about fatherhood and dealing with your children, like that film in 2018 destroyed me in a way that I was really hoping this rewatch would. And to a degree that did happen, because I think that first 30 minutes is incredible. It's so good until you get to some of those conveniences or some of those contrivances. I mean, and I mentioned something like the contrivances of Prestige. The contrivances here to me are just more egregious and more obvious. And it's harder for me to wrap my head around them. And then you get to that ending, which you noted that this is maybe the most frustrating film of all time. And I agree, because when this film is at its best, it is Nolan at his best. In fact, it is some of the best filmmaking of that entire decade. It is so good. But when this film is at its worst, it is really not good. I
agree.
Bad.
I agree.
That ending for me does not work at all. And I found myself like watching this on the other side of fatherhood. And I was not a father the first time I saw it. But on this side, it only heightened those frustrations all the more. Like it just, it made the ending more egregious to me. So, it's hard to ignore the prowess of this film when it's great. So I can't go to it being last.
Oh, it's not last. It's definitely not last on this list. I will agree, because the filmmaking's too good in those individual moments. And I have to give Nolan credit for, kind of being a mathematician in this, because from what we kind of understand, when I say we, I really mean someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? Yeah. There's a lot that's, technically correct about what Nolan is portraying from a scientific and theological standpoint. So I have so much respect for the film.
And Tars is one of the best robots. I don't care.
Tars is one of the best robots.
So
Everything about that, and then everything that's funneled through Matthew McConaughey and Jessica Chastain, all of that is great. I also think this film has my least favorite Nolan character of all time, and that's Anne Hathaway's Dr. Brand.
Yes.
Poor Anne Hathaway. What a lovely actress, such a talent. This character is not well realized at all. No talented actress could make that character work, I don't think.
No. As much as I love Chastain, and I agree with you, Chastain here is awesome. If you flip those roles, I don't know if it's any better.
I think you honestly, I think you just need to get rid of Dr. Brand completely.
Yeah,
because she's the one that's dedicated to the mission, and then you find out she wants to go to this other planet because that's where her love interest is. It's like, where the heck did that come from?
It's bad. I don't like it at all. But then on the other hand, it's my favorite Hans Zimmer score. Like, I know an all-time.
It's like,
score.
okay, now the vibe is just making it work. Didn't quite fool me, but
yeah. I mean, I am at once extremely bitterly frustrated with this film, and on the same token, entranced by its craft, like in its score. Like, I don't know. I still might put this. I think the craft of this is so good that despite the frustrations, I would still probably put this maybe just below Prestige.
So above Following?
Yeah.
I think I'm okay with that. As a whole, I do prefer Following. I think that's a more fascinating film overall, but the individual pockets of Interstellar can't be ignored.
Yeah. So the craft is just too good, I think.
I'll let the passion speak highly here. I'm not passionate enough to fight back between those two, so I'll just say, okay, we could put it just above Following, just below the Prestige. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
All right.
Dunkirk. I'll just get to it. This is top 3 somewhere for me. Easily.
Top 3 of Nolan, right?
Nolan.
You mean?
Yeah.
Oh, do we have the same top 3 Nolan? Why do we always have the same top 3 favorites from every director,
I don't
JD?
know.
I mean, maybe the order's different, but okay, let's go in order of release. Is your top 3 Memento, Inception, and Dunkirk?
Those are the 3, yes.
That's my 3.
Yeah.
That's my 3 from
there
Nolan.
So Dunkirk is great. I guess for the sake of time, so where should we put it then? Because
I mean, I think it's his best directed film overall.
So number 1
from beginning to end.
Inception. I mean, I'm not going to fight it if you want to put it at number 1.
I think it should be number 1, just given.
Because it honestly might, even on my personal ranking, which I don't have up in front of me, but I think I actually do have Dunkirk at 1. I love it.
I have it at 2. I have it at 2, just below Memento. But I think the film is the perfect synergy of everything Nolan represents, and he does it in under 2 hours, which I think is incredible.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that ending absolutely rivals Inception for me.
Honestly, seeing this in the theater, when that one moment between Tom Hardy and the plane reveals itself, and you find out what he just did for those people, the audience I was with actually applauded. It was a magical moment. It's why we go to the movies.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. So all right. So we'll put Dunkirk at number 1.
I think so.
Wish we had made more time for it earlier in the show, but Hollywood is crumbling. So what are you going to do? And then we get to Tenet. Where does Tenet fall here?
Tenet, I think, is his most fascinating film. It's the film of his. It's kind of like with Interstellar. I want to love this movie so much more. I really do. Mm-hmm. But Tenet as a film, I am liking more as time goes on.
Okay.
I think really the biggest problem I have with Tenet is when it does try to over-explain its espionage machinations in the first third. The first third of Tenet does not work for me. Mm-hmm. But when it starts to embrace the confusing mathematics of it all, it just becomes a mathematical vibe. And it just kind of rolls with it. So the second that our protagonist is first inverted, the movie completely takes off for me. Like, that whole back half, I think, is among the best stuff that Nolan has done because it's interesting and he doesn't feel bogged down by explaining the math. He just kind of lets it roll, and you just kind of have to waft with it. Mm-hmm. And in those moments, I did. I don't think it quite gets to its drama that it's trying. Like the emotional reveals we get at the end between certain characters, I don't think quite works, but I kind of appreciate the attempt at what it's going for. So I like this movie more now. I do. I don't love it, but I do like it. I think it's a fascinating experiment.
I do very much appreciate the swings that Nolan is taking with Tenet. I do agree there. Really, my issue with it, and I did revisit this soon-ish after we talked about it on the show, and I still think some of the details are confounding and poorly articulated, but the biggest wedge for me are the characters. Aside from Kat, I just think are a little too vague and empty for me. Like the Dunkirk style approach to that film still leaves a lot to be desired for me.
Sure.
And I have a really hard time engaging with it as a result. It's endearing enough. I think the camaraderie of Pattinson and Washington are very good, but it's just a film that isn't there in execution. I think on paper it is incredible. I think there's a lot to love with what it's aiming for. I just don't think it's articulated in a way that's clear, and I think it's not a film aiming for ambiguity. I'll just say that.
No. And to be fair, I don't necessarily mind that it's not aiming for ambiguity, but I think if it were to do that, I wish it was less spoken like it is. Like honestly, I would love to see this as a silent film. I would love that, and just let yourself kind of get enveloped by the machinations.
I agree. I think that's kind of fascinating because the brilliance of Tenet is not just that Nolan tells us what's happening. He very much shows us what's happening.
Yeah,
and you're able to figure it out because of what he shows us way more than what the dialogue does.
I agree. I think it's a better visually told movie than it is an actually told movie.
I very much do agree. And I think because of the vagueness of the characters, maybe that would have worked better as a silent movie than some of the dialogue that we get in Tenet. So just the emptiness of the central characters just, I don't know, it keeps me a little bit at an arm's length with the film. But I love the swings it's going for, though. I do appreciate that. So.
I like that Nolan essentially made his James Bond film after all, which is kind of fun. So, I guess, where do we rank this? Because it's a film I'm so fascinated by, and I'm liking more as time goes on. I'm
definitely in that prestige Interstellar area.
I'm thinking that, I would personally rank it above Interstellar because it just simply frustrates me less.
But see, and this is where it gets tricky, right? Because I am also frustrated by Tenet, and the frustrations of Interstellar are more potent. I do not disagree, but I also think the craft of Interstellar is better than what we get in Tenet. So
I know.
Real hard.
It makes it real hard.
But look, at the end of the day, like the flipping of those two isn't going to swing it too much for me. So if we want to put it below the prestige, like that's fine.
If you don't mind, I kind of feel like I want to put it above Interstellar, and it's primarily because I really admire the swings that he is going for. The almost like I don't give a shit attitude of it. It's kind of a cynical film in some ways, and I've really come to appreciate that. Maybe it's just me getting older. I'm responding to that that filmmaking approach more so nowadays. So like I would like to see it go a little bit above it. I like it more every time I watch it. It's a fascinating thing of a movie.
Yeah. Okay, so that is the Nolan side of this. We do have to get to the Greta Gerwig part of it, and as we noted, we're going to put Nights and Weekends on the bench for now. Lady Bird. 2017, one of my very favorite films of that year.
Same year as Dunkirk.
Same year as Dunkirk, even.
So we're talking about two of what are arguably the best films of that year.
Yeah, I had Lady Bird at number 1, and I have Dunkirk at 5 for 2017. That's where
What did I do that year? I got to figure that out again. Give me a second here.
Well, as you pull that up, I guess I'll just quickly talk.
You go ahead and talk, and I'll try and find my old ranking here.
But I love Lady Bird. I love its heart. I love its authenticity. It is striking in its humor. I love the way that it gets into place and how we are moved by places and the costs that come with, even thinking about moving away and kind of, what that means for people as they kind of come of age. I think is really great. And Saoirse Ronan, pitch perfect. An absolutely brilliant performance. Laurie Metcalf, one of the best supporting performances of that year. So, yeah, I love it. I could go on and on. It's my favorite film of that year, though, hands down.
So I had in my original list, and I'm not sure if this will still stand because I have to. My lists change every year. It's just a fact of life. But in my published list, I had Lady Bird at number 6 and Dunkirk at number 7.
That is so funny. So this is where it gets interesting because in our little ranking here, we have Dunkirk at 1. Is it disingenuous to have Lady Bird below any of these films if we had it ranked higher initially? And honestly, like, I don't know. Like,
it's such a different kind of movie.
This
is why the whole Barbenheimer methodology is just kind of bullshit.
It gets so tricky because we're comparing films that have nothing in common whatsoever. But I guess when you do year-end list, it's kind of the same thing.
It's kind of the same thing, but
yeah.
When you get to year-end lists, sometimes you find yourself skewing your ranking a little bit just to kind of add some like stacked variety, right? So that way not the same types of films are always stacked next to each other. You know what I mean? Which is why, and maybe, can we get a little bit ahead of ourselves by sort of talking a little bit about Little Women at the same time here?
Sure.
Little Women's my favorite of all of these films we're going to talk about. Like, that's my number one.
Wow, and that was my favorite of 2019.
So, that's basically my way of saying, does it seem right to have 2 Greta Gerwig films top this list? Which is my way of thinking. I want to put Little Women at number 1, then Dunkirk, and then Lady Bird, and then the rest being what it is.
I can live with that. Yeah,
you can. Okay, we're doing it. We're doing it. It's been decided. It has been decided.
No, I kind of love that idea. If I'm being perfectly honest, because Little Women and Lady Bird, my number 1s respectively of their years. I think they're great. And I think that honestly, that's what's made this conversation fun. I do wish that Gerwig had more films for us to talk about here, but
yeah. But that's interesting that in Nolan's filmography, if we throw in Gerwig's films, they top his list.
2 of the 3 top spots. That is, but that's not to take too much away from Inception or Memento, because those are great elite films of their own. But yeah, there is something about Gerwig and her sensibilities as a filmmaker, and it'll be fun to revisit this the next time we get together after Barbie and after Oppenheimer. We might actually on next week's show, we might have to start out with a little bit of an update on this list.
That's a good point. Yeah, let's table that in now so we don't forget about it.
Absolutely. So. That's that. So yeah, but I love Gerwig. I love her sensibilities as a director. She's a lot of fun, but in the energy of her films is a filmmaker that has something on her mind, and she does such a great job of articulating the thematic prowess of her movies as well as the emotional complexities of them, and it's great. So yeah,
I just think Little Women especially is one of the most beautiful period pieces we've gotten as of late, and a very provocative one too. Like the way that she changes the original ending of that novel to say something about modern society, even as it related back and in the time that it's portraying that story, I think is so interesting and so beautiful. Yeah. It's going into this, I knew Little Women was going to be my favorite of this entire exercise. In fact, I think when we did our original 2019 ranking, I had Little Women maybe at like number 3, but that is my favorite film of that year. Yeah. It really is. And I'm okay with this ranking being Little Women, Dunkirk, and Lady Bird as the top 3.
Okay, so, and then I guess just to round that out, is Inception,
so Nights and Weekend.
The Memento, The Dark Knight, Batman Begins, The Prestige, Tenet, Interstellar, Following Insomnia, and The Dark Knight Rises.
And where would you place Nights and Weekends in all of this?
So I would probably put that somewhere around Interstellar. I might do it just below Interstellar.
Okay.
Again, I can't get away from how good the craft is of that film. It is some of the best I have ever seen. When it's rocking on all cylinders, it's great. So I'd put it just below Interstellar. That's probably where I'd have it. That one.
Here is our official Barbenheimer ranking until next week when we actually include Barbie and Oppenheimer into this.
Okay.
I don't want to speculate. I was first about to ask, like, where do we think some of those films, those two specific films, might end up here? But you know what? I don't want to ask that question because I don't want to speculate. I don't want to go into them hoping or thinking what they'll end up being. All I know is I'm excited for both of them, and I'm going to be seeing both of them.
I agree. I cannot wait. We'll circle back to this next week on the show. For now, we will wind down here. We are going a little long because of everything we had to talk about here. But a quick thank you to all of our patrons. We really cannot do this without you. Your support means the world to us. Patreon.com/InSessionFilm is where you can find us. We have reviews for Joyride up and Mission Impossible. And, of course, we will get to, at some point, reviews of Oppenheimer and Barbie. We'll figure out schedule. All of that is kind of up in the air as of the time we are recording this right now. But
should they be part of the same episode? Should Barbie and Oppenheimer be on the same episode? Because
I mean, thematically, that kind of makes sense. But
we can release it as a Barbenheimer.
We could, but we'll probably need to separate them because those reviews will probably go kind of long. But
that, and I think there'll be ones that people want to hear anyway. So we'll make it easier for people to find.
Yes, absolutely. So stay tuned for all of that. There is a new Women in Session episode that, again, is coming out soon. Right now, as we're doing all this, I don't know when, but they did record a new episode on St. Elmo's Fire. So you can be on the lookout for that. It's probably up by the time this goes out. So
interesting. Okay.
Be on the lookout for that. Be sure to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. God knows what else is out there. But you can find us there. Leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that sort of stuff. And YouTube, if you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe, hit that like button and everything. Hello, everybody, if you can see our face. Welcome.
Hello, everyone from the AI sphere.
Oh, God. All the AI robots watching this. Get out of here.
Get out of here.
Get out of here.
Unless you're Haley Joel Osment, in which I'll say, I hope you find your mom.
Exactly. All right. Any final thoughts, Brendan, before we get out of here?
No, man, enjoy your vacation. Take some lovely time with your family and enjoy the mountains in Tennessee. And if you find yourself in Knoxville, go say hi to my future brother-in-law.
Okay, will do. Yeah, I'm as people are hearing this, I'm already in Tennessee. God knows what is happening. I'm probably at the cabin chilling, or maybe I have COVID again. Who knows? Because the last time we went to Tennessee, I got COVID, and it was not fun.
Oof.
Other than...
Good luck to you.
I got to watch Luca about 45 times, which was...
And you never got sick of it.
And I never got sick of it. Yeah, if anything, I loved it more on each viewing, so...
Oh, gotta love it. Oh, Dan Romer and that music. I think that's certainly a helpful tool
good. There. At any rate, we hope everyone enjoys Barbenheimer. Have a great time at the theaters. It might be the last time, so especially enjoy it before everything crumbles to hell.
That's a morbid way to end this show, man.
Morbid or celebratory? Who knows? It could be a little bit of both. At any rate, thanks for listening, watching, everybody. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Oh, man. It was a good run, Brennan. It was a good run, at least.
Yeah. Nolan ain't cold.
Get into a Honda and get into adventure. Like the 2023 CR-V Hybrid. It's ruggedly versatile and road trip ready. With available all-wheel drive and convenient features like an available hands-free power tailgate. The fun starts now. Or check out the 2023 Accord Hybrid. With a 4-mode drive system and an abundance of tech, this hybrid will get you where you want to go your way. Find your perfect Honda at your local Honda dealer today.